back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. The topic for today is an update on my 2024 predictions as well as my resolutions for the year. So this is a video that I make every year, right? I typically talk about what happened in the prior year, talk about what's coming up the next year. This one's going to be more of a reflection on, again, whether my predictions came true for 2024 and whether I actually fulfilled my resolutions. So before we dive in, as always, hit like, go ahead and hit subscribe. And if you'd like, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at what_can_brown. All right, so this is the time of year where I especially love making videos because the topics kind of write themselves. I always do one of these predictions and resolutions videos, but I have, sort of a year in recap type of videos coming up in terms of, what are my top favorite reissues of the year, sort of favorite audiophile releases, new music, best new music of the year, that kind of thing. So look forward to some of those videos that are coming up. But today I want to talk about what happened in 2024. I know that we're not quite there at the end, but this is the time of year. We're towards the end of the year, and I thought, what better time than now? I don't think anything too crazy is going to happen in the next, say, 2 weeks. So if you'll remember, and in fact, even if you don't remember, I'm going to remind you. In January, I put out my predictions for 2024. What I want to do is review those and talk about them in a little bit. Talk about whether they actually came true. So one of my sort of overarching predictions for the year was that the market was going to grow, but it was going to grow slower than it had in prior years. So the interesting thing about this is not more than, I think it was 2 months ago, there was an article that came out that sort of made a splash. And in fact, if you're somebody who pays attention to sort of vinyl news at all, or you were watching some of the other YouTubers who made videos about this, I'm sure you'll recall this stat. And the stat was that vinyl sales plummeted 33%. That was the headline. Well, guess what? It turns out that was actually a bad stat. So vinyl sales in October, I think they were doing a year-over-year look. Vinyl sales were actually up 6.2%. And even though that was a very clickable headline, vinyl sales plummet 33%, it was completely false. So to kind of explain, I guess, what happened, because the correction of this stat made a lot less news than the actual stat did. And so again, it sent everybody into a tailspin. There were like panels, like live streams, people talking about the state of the vinyl market and all of this stuff. But again, it wasn't true. So essentially what happened was the previous report that they had put out in 2023 was by sampling, I believe it was independent stores, to extrapolate sales of vinyl. However, what they did in 2024 is they were counting, I believe, actual sales from, I want to say, all stores in the US market. And it ended up they were doing like the wrong year-over-year comparison. So in any event, what they had to do was essentially use the new methodology to restate the 2023 sales, and then they were able to come up with the actual growth. So there's kind of two stats that they put out there in correction. One is that the vinyl sales were actually up 6.2% year over year. And the other, if you want to look at it like this, is that vinyl shipments to retail stores was up 17%. And I'm not going to pretend to kind of know the nuances. I don't know if that means necessarily that, were retail stores stocking more than they were selling. So I don't know how necessarily to interpret those two stats together, but the point is that vinyl sales are not down. They are continuing to grow, just at a slower pace. And again, what I led with, the market will grow, but slower. So if you go back, I'll link it just so you can see that I was right. But essentially, yes, the market does continue to grow, just not as much as it has in prior years. And I think, I think that that's causing some strain actually with some of the labels. I mean, growth is good, but at the same time, if you're making investments in a business based on the idea of it experiencing double-digit, sometimes high double-digit sales growth year over year, and then all of a sudden it's 6.2%, well, that's not necessarily good news. And I think that labels could be, could be kind of struggling a little bit or coming up with a new strategy in order to try to get back to those great double-digit sales, right? So that was kind of the first prediction that I made, and again some of the sort of supporting evidence. So a few of the other ones, and this was a little bit in reaction to this prediction that the market was going to grow, but grow at a slower pace. I said that the labels were going to basically pull a few different levers in order to adjust to the new reality, and we'll kind of talk about whether any of those came true. So the first thing that I said was that I thought that labels may react to the slower growth by trying to release mass appeal titles rather than going for those, those more obscure titles. And here's the thing: is that a lot of labels focus across all genres, right? All sort of sides of the music space, and so if they want to release mass appeal titles, inevitably what that means is less jazz and probably more rock, more pop. Spend more of their energy, more of their production capacity, right, around putting out some of those mass appeal titles. Like Taylor Swift is sort of the extreme example, right? So that was one of the things that I said, and I can't necessarily say whether we've seen that happen in the jazz space. So if you think about the titles that Acoustic Sounds puts out, that Craft Recordings does, Blue Note, or really any of these kind of call them larger jazz focused outfits, yes, we do have another version of A Love Supreme that was just released. They're calling it on Diamond Clear Vinyl. Um, and I would call that more of a mass appeal title, at least within the context of jazz. Although, of course, nothing is a mass appeal title in comparison with pop or rock. But I don't necessarily think that these labels are backing away from the more unknown titles. It does feel like they're making a concerted effort to look in their sort of recording catalog or in their vault and trying to bring out titles that people want. And I think that they, if anything, they may be doing a better job of actually listening to what their customers are asking for, whereas before it was kind of like, no, we know what's best for you. I think it feels to me like there's more engagement with the customer base. And I see that on social media with more of these outfits basically creating their own presence on social media, whereas before they didn't have it, right? So Chad Kassem has certainly been out front more really over the last 2 years, making his own videos. We even had an unboxing of the Blue Note Review box set by Don Was, which was very unusual. I feel like he hasn't really had that kind of engagement. But you see Joe Harley out there more and more, Kevin Gray out there more and more. And I think that engagement is important. And it's not to say that we can't trust them to make great decisions, because obviously a lot of these folks have great track records. But I think that, you're always going to do better by listening to customers. Now, one of the other levers that I said that I thought maybe these labels would, sort of pull or exercise was that they would increase prices. Now, the interesting thing about this, again, with slower growth, is that I don't think they did that. At least not for the same titles. So to kind of unpack that, because I'm basically half right here. So what didn't happen was that Acoustic Sounds did not increase the price of their, say, Verve or Contemporary, sort of series of releases. Prices stayed the same. Craft Recordings too hasn't. I don't believe that they've increased the price for any of their sort of standard releases that they're a part of. Blue Note Tone Poet remained the same. Blue Note Classic series remained the same. So despite the fact that inflation has been relatively high over the last few years, although obviously it's cooling this year, the prices have stayed the same for those standard releases. So to the extent that the prices are going up for the very same item, that has not happened. Now, at the same time, one of the things that I said is that I thought that they may focus, and this was actually the case in 2023 as well, that they would focus more on higher dollar deluxe edition box set kinds of items. And so what that allows them to do, it's not just charging more. Like, yes, they're going to charge more because they're more expensive to produce, right? So we know that they're gonna charge more, but effectively what they're able to do is extract more margin from the same unit sales. So for example, if I'm putting out that Blue Note Review box set, I can only press 2,000 of them, and I know that I'm gonna be able to price it significantly higher, and therefore, even if the percent margin isn't that much more than a Tone Poet, it's still greater margin, and so for every unit that they sell, they're making more money, right? So I think that that's one of the ways that Blue Note, as well as some of these other labels, really, because Craft Recordings is doing it with their small batch series, etc., you have those kind of, call them base level items that everybody can buy, and you try to grow that. Meanwhile, you release something that's a little bit more exclusive, limited release, box set, what have you, at a higher price point to appeal to a certain sector of the market. And those items are going to be typically going to carry higher margin. And so for every unit you sell, you're going to make a little bit more money. So I think this is one of the ways that these labels are reacting to the fact that there's a little bit slower growth. So if they're not going to be able to make, say, 20-30% greater volume of sales in the next year, what they can do is improve their margin, right? In order to sort of get more profit. So I think that is I think that that's one of the ways that these labels have reacted, and I do think that this will continue. And I know right now I'm not issuing predictions for the coming year, but this is one of those things I think that's going to continue. It's not that they're abandoning one customer base in favor of another. It's that they're trying to appeal to different pockets of the market, different sides of the market, and give them something that they want. And this is just a kind of a marketing strategy that really all businesses do. It's just that we're kind of seeing it more and more, specifically in the vinyl space. So one of the other things that was happening, and I know I talked about for 2024, was that it felt like in prior years, the labels were just pressing so many. They were pressing just high quantities of these records, and at the end of the year, they were issuing massive discounts in order to get rid of stock. And that continues to happen. That continued to happen in 2024. In fact, we've seen just recently 30% off, 40% off sales from really every major label. And what it has kind of taught folks is that if you wait, then you can get something for significantly less. Now, I suppose the question will we people in this hobby, are we willing to wait, right? You all know that I'm not, right? If something comes out, I typically will just go ahead and get it, with the idea that, no, it's out, I want to hear it now. Like, okay, I could wait 4 or 5 months and save $5 or $10. But, that's just not something that really, I don't know, I guess means as much to me. Saving just a couple of bucks and being able to say that I got it for less. But that is something that a lot of folks do. Or when it goes on sale, obviously it's just a reason to be like, all right, now's the time. Like, now's a better time than it was in the past, and I'm gonna spend less money and get the same thing now. So I think, though, that one of the predictions I made for 2024 is that labels really should be releasing less quantity so that they're not in that situation. I felt like they should go after, say, a greater variety of titles and press less of each of them in order to get the sales, rather than, being in this situation by trying to get rid of stock. And that just hasn't really happened in 2024. It feels like there's still a lot of copies of stuff. And I think that, Black Friday was one indicator, the Black Friday Record Store Day titles that were pressed in significantly fewer or less quantity. And we'll see whether that changes or whether that continues really for the coming year. But 2024 again really was just high pressing quantity for a lot of these titles, and everything inherently was available, which I think is great for people who want it. But the problem is, if labels are suffering because they press too many, that's going to inevitably be a bad thing for us collectors in the long run, or in the medium run anyway. All right, so really the last prediction, because a lot of my predictions were sort of about that economic kind of side of it, what was going to happen, and again, to some degree, I think a lot of it came to fruition, but the market sort of has these nuances and things continue to change. But one of the other major things that I brought up was that I believed that labels would make an effort to rethink their supply chains. So at that time, and this is going to sound funny, a year ago, one of the things that everybody was talking about is that the fact that for international buyers, it was harder to get these titles that are coming out that are in such demand, and why aren't labels able to figure this out? Right. So, there's some things that are out of their hands. Right. So there's trade policy that they don't control. There's shipping costs that they don't control. And those are, important things to consider when you start placing blame on a label for not having distribution set up There's also different rules on whether labels are allowed to distribute to certain countries based on licensing. So I believe that when you license a recording, getting a license just for a release in the US is very different than a global release. And not every label has the ability to go through that licensing, to afford it, to justify it. And sometimes you just simply can't get it for certain markets for reasons that I'm not going to pretend to be, fully aware of. But what I said at the beginning of the year was I thought that labels would start rethinking their supply chains in order to find a way to get more titles in the hands of international buyers. Now, some of the realities that we had then are still the case. There's, inflation, but it's coming down, high interest rates, but they're coming down. There's geopolitical instability. That's probably only increasing. There's more talks about changes in trade policy. And all of that is going to be a problem for international buyers and with these labels' interest in setting up distribution. So, did this come true, I suppose is the question. Are labels making more of an effort? I think I would argue that actually that is only just starting to turn now. So whereas it felt like it was out of reach at the beginning of the year, one of the things that we saw when Blue Note put out that subscription program for Tone Poet, which everybody was so excited about, especially international buyers for whom this was not going to be available. But one of the things that we found very quickly after is that Blue Note said that they were actively looking for a solution to make a subscription service available for international buyers. So we're going to find out whether the recent election puts a damper on that effort. But the fact that they're even looking at it, considering it, I think is somewhat exciting. Now, on the other hand, one of the things that we saw throughout the year was Vinyl Me Please canceling their subscription service for international buyers across the board. So that service is no longer going to be available for international buyers. So these two things are kind of in conflict. But what is the case is that this is a problem. Like it's clear that it's a problem distributing vinyl abroad. And I know that a lot of folks outside the United States, and I apologize, I know I have like half my audience out there is outside of the United States. So when I say international, I don't mean that as a sort of a slight. I really mean sort of ex-US, right? I know that there's a huge market for these titles, and I know that it's really difficult and it's very expensive, and a lot of you are probably forced to, either go to a couple of those, probably Europe-based, stores, retail stores, online channels in order to actually secure some of these titles. And obviously there are some great labels that are putting out great music abroad as well, or ex-US. But I also know that there's a lot of folks who have to source this stuff from eBay, from US sellers directly, and that can be quite expensive because simply there is not good distribution for a lot of great releases to you all. So, so I guess, again, this is not about predicting for 2025, but pointing out that it was a problem, and now seeing these kind of almost conflicting stories about what the reality is for VMP and what Blue Note's trying to do. And I want to say that Acoustic Sounds has maybe, come up with a better solution. I think there may be a better solution for UHQR titles, but it really is hit or miss. There's no sort of consistent approach across all of these labels for making music available in a less expensive way outside the United States. All right, so resolutions. This probably maybe be a little bit more fun than some of that market stuff, unless you're you're kind of like a corporate sort of nerd like myself. So yeah, let's talk about my resolutions that I made last year, and I'm actually pretty proud of this stuff because I made some kind of bold resolutions, I thought, at the beginning of the year. So the first thing that I talked about was I wanted to purchase a new turntable. Now, if you're even a casual sort of listener or subscriber of mine, subscribe if you haven't. You'll remember that I made a couple of videos about my journey for buying a new turntable, and this was mostly at the beginning of the year. And there's a couple of aspects to this. So again, my resolution was I needed to buy a new turntable. So I had a Marantz 6200 turntable, and the problem with it is every time that the tone arm, it had auto return, so when the tone arm got to the middle it would return, and that was working, but the problem is every time it returned and it shut off the sound, there was like a loud pop. to such an extent that whenever a record was about to finish, I would have to like basically run up to the turntable and make sure that I turned down the volume because I was worried that the loud pop was going to be like damaging my speakers. So I obviously needed a new turntable. It was a vintage item, and I thought I was ready for something that was, you know, a modern turntable. So anyway, I successfully bought my Luxman turntable, and you know, 151 Mark II. So you know, I made a video about it, and I originally had a budget of $3,000 for the turntable, and I went significantly more than that. I think more than $5,000 or $6,000. And part of the reason was because of the specific turntable that I got, which is just over here, but also the fact that I bought two cartridges, right? So I bought Hana stereo and mono cartridges, and those are not they're not inexpensive. But the reason why I wanted to do that is because I wanted to have swappable head shells so that I could play mono and stereo with these different, you know, with the different cartridges without actually having to do any additional setup, you know, messing with tracking weight and all that. So I wanted identical head shells, identically weighted cartridges that basically had the same setup. And that's what I've been working with essentially for the better part of the year. And absolutely no complaints. Switching the head shells is not a problem. It's not a headache. Really is just as simple as unscrewing one and screwing the other in. I haven't dropped it yet or bent any styluses, styli. So it's actually been working out really, really well. And I do feel like I'm getting the benefit of having those dedicated cartridges, being able to listen to mono and stereo, and again, no headaches. Say if I'm listening to a stereo and I'm like, oh, now I want to listen to a mono one. The only thing I really need to do that I didn't think about is I basically have to turn off the entire system, just because I don't want to have any like noise from like, you know, essentially breaking and making connection of electricity, you know, in any way. So that's kind of one thing that it's a little bit of a pain to have to turn all the switches off. So anyway, outside of that though, from a listening experience standpoint, from an improvement standpoint in terms of how it sounds versus that old Marantz turntable, very happy with that decision. Now, the kind of the other part of this is that I realized that I wanted to list 500 records. So this was another resolution. I wanted to list for sale. I wanted to sell 500 records. And I did that. In fact, I've probably sold over 600 records throughout the year, but 500 at the very beginning of the year. And that was how I justified the expense of the turntable and the cartridges. And in fact, I think I made somewhere around $14,000 or $15,000 over the course of the year selling those records. And again, you know, the cost of this kind of setup was like, again, like $6,000 or maybe $7,000. It was something like that, including the cartridges and everything. So it was I would say that those aspects were just a complete success, right? So I was able to get that new turntable. I was able to sell the 500 records. I was able to use the money to pay myself for that. So that, you know, again, I'm pretty proud of going through that process. It helped me cull my collection. But the funny thing is that because I buy so much and because I've, you know, kind of been buying some collection sort of stuff lately, I don't know that I have less records than I did at the beginning of the year. So that says something about the volume that I've been buying. And that kind of leans into my next resolution, was that I wanted to have nothing on the floor in this listening room. I didn't want to have stacks of vinyl leaning up against things, unable to be shelved because I don't have any space. And yeah, that was a big, I wanted a clean record room. And unfortunately, and despite selling 500 records, I failed. So I still have records that are piling up that I don't have space for in the shelves. And inevitably what that means is that this is going to be one of those resolutions that continues into the next year. But 2024 showed that I do have the ability to sell large amounts of vinyl when I put my mind to it. And so I'm, you know, optimistic on this one sort of continuing into the next year. All right, so the next resolution that I had was that I wanted to upgrade my video recording quality. And this is kind of a silly one. This is a little bit of like a, you know, sort of a vain thing. But what I mentioned in my video last year was that a lot of people have better videos than I do. Just in terms of, you know, I'm not talking about the content, because obviously my content is no. But what I was getting at specifically was like super clean images, better audio, better lighting than I had, right? And I was jealous. because felt like I should have the ability to achieve something similar. And even though I think that there are plenty, gosh, there are plenty of folks out there in the YouTube community, Spins Vinyl. You know, I'm trying to think of some of the other outfits or sort of you know, YouTube channels that just have significantly better production quality. But there's a bunch of them. Pieces of Vinyl, I think, is another. Um, and I aspire to do better. And the problem is, and one of the things I said is I wanted to upgrade my camera because I'm, you know, been using an iPhone for my entire time on this channel, and been using either a lapel microphone or just using the microphone that's on the iPhone. And I didn't get a new camera. I did get a better, you know, what I would call a better audio setup, but I'm not convinced that it's necessarily translating and having great audio. So this is one of those things that you know, I just continue to do better. And I don't know necessarily, you know, to what extent people sort of tune in and out based on the quality, unless it's significantly lackluster. But this is just one of those things that, again, I want to continue to do better. All right, so the last one that I wanted to address was a very lofty resolution, and that is I wanted to figure out a way to have more of an impact in this hobby. Part of that resolution was because I know a bunch of people who are actually doing much more in the space of jazz vinyl than I am. Right? I'm just here on YouTube, and every now and then I make a couple of videos, you know, every week, and you all listen to me go on and on about some of these topics. But this YouTube jazz vinyl sort of space is still quite small, and the idea of having you know, having a more of an impact, I think, more broadly, is something that interested me. And I know people in this hobby. I have friends who you know, who have you know, in conversations with the estates of some of these musicians, they're writing biographies. I know people who are licensing music and starting their own labels. And I really wanted to feel like I was having some type of impact like that, while still you know, while still being able to sort of have my day job, because, you know, this isn't, none of this is lucrative. You know, there's no money to be made being a jazz vinyl influencer, and to the extent that you get anything, it's maybe every now and then you get a record sent to you, although most labels don't. Most labels are not giving out freebies. I think that that's a little bit of a misconception. So I wanted to figure out a way to have more of an impact. And I will say that I have not delivered on sort of that lofty goal of like something that's big that I could do, but I would say that I'm leaning into this a little bit more outside of just listening in my room and just making these videos for you. So I did start DJing this year, in a few different venues in Atlanta. So specifically instrumental jazz music. One of those venues is called Stereo, which happens to be very close to my house. Sort of coffee shop by day and cocktail bar at night. And I think every night, Wednesday through Sunday, they have a DJ spinning, you know, spinning vinyl. And so I've started to do that, done that a few times now. And then there's also a wine bar that opened somewhat recently called Commune, which is in Decatur, Georgia. And I've done a few you know, sort of DJ events there as well. So, you know, I do like the idea of sort of sharing music with others, and, you know, those things don't pay. In fact, I've been, you know, usually donate my salary to whatever cause is going on. But um, you know, so it's not a money thing. It's more of like, I wanted to try it out and figure out if this is something that I enjoy, and it turns out that I do. It doesn't really require much effort for me, and I get a lot of enjoyment. I like to talk to people about the music, and I like to spin. So that's kind of one way that I've sort of you know, exercised this muscle, I suppose, of having more of an impact. But again, it's like, you know, it's such a minimal impact. Otherwise, and something that I haven't talked about yet, and I'm not talking about in any detail right now, but I am assisting with the release of a new album, a reissue that's coming out in 2025, in terms of working with the person who sort of is starting the label, and assisting with the test pressing in terms of evaluating it, identifying any you know, problems with it before it's released. And I'd never done any of that before, and I thought that was super cool that this person reached out to me, and I'm kind of learning something about how this process goes in terms of how decisions are made about what to release and how to release it, how to evaluate test pressings and that kind of thing. So, you know, these are sort of minor ways that I've started to do something that's maybe a little bit more creative with this passion. But, you know, at the same time, I'm always looking for something more. One of the other things that I have going on is that, you know, I think it was over a year ago where I traveled to New York, and I helped do a radio program for 5 hours covering the Riverside Records label on WKCR. And so, they broadcast in Manhattan, and then you can sort of stream it online. And so that was pretty fun. Got to work with the founders of JMI Recordings to put out that radio program, and actually we're working on another one for 2025. So that's something that that's another thing that I'm doing. That's sort of a again, a somewhat sort of creative outlet, or feel like I'm doing something with this hobby rather than just listening to music. All right, so that's kind of it. That's sort of the year in review, at least in terms of, again, predictions and how I did with my resolutions. Like I said, I will be making another video that's more of a forward look to issue my new predictions for 2025, as well as what I want to accomplish in 2025, sort of personally in this hobby. And yeah, I haven't fully thought through all of that, so that video will be forthcoming. But anyway, I'm kind of curious people's reaction to any of this. I know the economics piece is something that a lot of people think about. Everybody's trying to predict the sort of the fall of the market, the collapse of the market, and that just it's something that people talk about every single year with such confidence. They say it's a bubble, it's bursting. It's like, no, like it just hasn't. And I don't think. I say this a lot. I think that the value of lesser condition, less desirable stuff that was inflated during the pandemic, yes, that stuff went down. But the value for high quality, top releases, top condition, that stuff continues to go up. And I just 2025 is not the year that the bubble's going to burst. But it's something that people love to sort of fantasize about in a weird way. It's like this weird kind of thing that everybody almost wants it to happen, simply so that they can then maybe throw in money at the right time. But because everybody has that mentality, all it means is the prices are just going to continue to go up at the highest end of the market. But anyway, I'll talk more about what I think is going to happen in 2025 with this hobby, and including about the prices of original pressings, because I do have some thoughts on all of this. So in any event, look forward to some of those upcoming videos, and appreciate y'all's time as always. Thanks very much.